Why did nobody get? It's nobody's business but the Turks. Istanbul. I don't know why that's in my head now. So here's the thing. In most games now, they seem to have made it so that everybody's super magical. And I really feel like a lot of what I've been playing at with designing some alternative magic systems is to sort of stem the flow of the action away from relying heavily on magic. Now, having wizards use magic makes a certain amount of sense. Having clerics using magic makes a certain amount of sense. And druids to a certain degree. Sorcerers, warlocks, those are magic classes. When you start to move outside that range, though, you start to get to the point where, like, giving everybody magic is a problem. And I feel like it's more accurately it's better shown when talking about a class like the Ranger. The Ranger, back in the days when I was younger, when I played, I think you had the option in Final Fantasy. Let me see if I can pull that up. Some of the original Final Fantasy games. But the issue I have with it is, in the original, in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, which was the one I grew up on, the one I played when I was younger, the Ranger was my favorite class. And I just really liked the versatility of the class. And it meant that in the course of gameplay, it wasn't likely that I was going to encounter a situation where my skills wouldn't be the useful ones. Like, if you're a bard and your talents are musical inspiration or subterfuge or trickery or social manipulation, it does you no good in the middle of the rainforest. Like, social manipulation is not going to do you much good. Who do you have to manipulate? You're in the forest. That's where that skill set should be useful. But a bard, it doesn't have a lot of use out there. Same thing for a low intelligence barbarian hammer wielder in a situation that's mainly involving courtship rituals and diplomatic envoys between kingdoms at a United Nations rally. That's like a UN meeting. There's not a lot of use for a ranger or a barbarian. It's just not what it's designed to be useful for. The Ranger used to be a class where if you're in a diplomatic situation at the UN, the Ranger has something they can bring to the table. If you're out in the rainforest, the Ranger had something it could bring to the table. If you're in a dungeon fighting monsters and picking locks, the Ranger had something to offer. And so the Ranger was one of those very versatile characters. They were never the strongest character in the room, but on the scale of what you had was like the wizard, thief, I would almost say like ranger, cleric, and then fighter as your classes. That ranger ability made you more powerful a fighter than a thief or a wizard, but not quite. It might even be parallel to cleric, but not quite a fighter. So I feel like it was a good middle of the road situation. And now what it feels like more is they were trying to shoehorn magic into all the classes. You have the idea of the rogue now has the arcane trickster, which honestly I love as a class. The bard has magic, not just performance skills. And the fighters have the arcane fighters, and the monk has mysticism and the key powers. And so you have like everybody's got some magic gimmick that they can use. And uh, for classes like the bard, it's inherent in the bard from the get-go. You have abilities like that. With characters like the druid, magic's inherent in the character class. For a class like the rogue, arcane trickster only comes in when you can pick that specialty later at like level 3, 2 or 3. And for the barbarian, the ancestral guardian, where you have the ability to summon the spirits of your ancestors to protect your allies. That the first instinct of that ability doesn't show up till level 3. But for some reason, they've established it in a way that Bard, Bard sort of, they've made it inherent in their magic. But Arcane Trickster gets their magic at level 3. But somehow they want the Ranger to be magical at least close to the beginning. They basically make an inferior fighter that's not very good at level 1. Then at level 2, you get magic abilities. And so now you're a not as effective fighter with not as effective magic user tossed into the mix. And I feel like it doesn't make it better. Like, the whole structure you've built really offers a lot of the capabilities and the sensation of the Ranger class got distributed to other classes. So there's a subclass in Rogue called the Scout that takes basically a character that's a rogue, a rough and tumble scoundrel, a Han Solo, that type of character, and it says, "Oh, you're used to traveling out into the edges of civilization to explore and find leads that the party can follow." Well, that's the Ranger's gig. And the Barbarian? Well, the Barbarian now has features where they can hook onto totem animals and tap into some of the powers of nature and influence their environment a little bit better as a fighter. So take on some of the aspects of some of the animals they work with. That's a Ranger. And, some of the arcane classes can summon familiars. Well, the animal companion was sort of the Ranger's thing. And the druid? Well, the druid can take on wild shape and take on some of the aspects of the animals around them, and it also can influence some of the environment by using magic that way. That's sort of what the Ranger did. I'm like, you're sort of cribbing on the Ranger's capabilities. And so I feel like by making all the other classes more versatile, you've sort of removed what made the Ranger unique and interesting. Now it's interesting to note I'm looking at the Final Fantasy wiki here. Ranger is mostly known for their ability to equip various ranged weapons, bows predominantly. Now, for a character like it's tempting to think of Robin Hood as a ranger, but he's not really. He's a rogue. He's that forest rogue, the bandit. The ranger, I suppose the ranger could kind of be seen as a bandit. But on a flip side, So a ranger is meant to be somebody who's patrolling the wilderness and defending it against invaders or monsters or things like that. I feel like the problem with this class now is everybody else fills the position so well that there's not a lot of call for it. Now, the base ranger is what I'm talking about here. When you look at some of the subclasses in ranger, ranger subclasses, and I was looking at some of the magics that could potentially be useful, but it's so hard. Like, the theme for a ranger is a defender of the wilderness, or sort of like that person who protects the territory, scouts ahead, sort of melds and is at home in the wilds, but is sort of a loner from civilization. So he's defending civilization and the wild, sort of like a trying to make a compromise between the two, find a way to help them work together and fit together. And I feel like it's an awful heavy load to drop on a ranger like that. Because, I mean, building the class itself, just making the class work is a bit of a mess. But the ranger's subtypes are Beastmaster, Gloomstalker, Horizon Walker, Hunter, Monster Slayer, and Swarm Keeper. Now that's just a whole nother mess right there on top of it all. And what I mean by that is, like, literally what we've got here with the Swarm Keeper is it's a new class, subclass that they're trying to make. Feeling a deep connection to the world around them, some rangers reach out through their magical connection to nature and gather a host of fey spirits, which take the form of swarming beasts. It can be buzzing insects, fluttering birds, slippery squids, or otherwise. What? I mean, okay, I guess. I mean, like, how does this fit, like, traditional character archetypes of a ranger? This feels weird. Monster Slayer sort of makes sense. You have dedicated yourself to hunting down creatures of the night and wielders of grim magic. A Monster Slayer seeks out vampires, dragons, evil fae, fiends, and other magical threats. Trained in supernatural techniques to overcome such monsters, Slayers are experts in unearthing and defeating mighty mystical foes. Okay, so at 3rd level, you learn an additional spell when you reach certain levels in this class, as shown in the Monster Slayer spell table. The spells count as a ranger spell for you, but it doesn't count against the number of ranger spells you know. And then it's protection from evil and good, zone of truth, magic circle, banishment, hold monster. So these are just spells that you gain. But they don't count against the number of range spells you know. So, do they put a limit on how many times you can cast that? They don't say. Ranger level. Okay, so at ranger level, you get protection from evil and good. But it doesn't say how many times you're allowed to cast it in a day. I don't know. That just doesn't make any sense. So Monster Slayer is close to a core value I could see for a ranger. The Hunter class, emulating the Hunter archetype, means accepting your place as a bulwark between civilization and the terrors of the wilderness. As you walk the Hunter path, you learn specialized techniques from fighting the threats you face, from rampaging ogres and hordes of orcs to towering giants and terrifying dragons. Okay? Colossus Slayer, Giant Killer, Horde Breaker. defensive tactics include escape horde, multi-attack defense, steel will, and then multi-attack that you get are arrow swarm, whirlwind, superior hunter defenses. Like, these are chunks of abilities that don't require spell slots, it sounds like. And that's a workable, like, that's okay. But again, like, you don't need a magic system to be able to do that. That's just an ability the ranger gets. And then the next one up on the list here is Horizon Walkers. And these are essentially... Okay, let's see what it says. Horizon Walkers guard the world against threats that originate from other planes of existence. They seek out planar portals and keep watch over them, venturing to the inner planes and the outer planes as needed to pursue their foes. These rangers are also friends to any force in the multiverse, especially benevolent dragons, fae, and elementals that work to preserve life and the order of the planes. So this is somebody who wanders through different planes, like different realities, crossing over into it's it's just a weird thing to add. Like, that, what does that have to do with the person who lives out in the wilderness and interacts with nature? Like, that seems such a weird way to do that. It's like, it's become the class for chunking in all those other interesting ideas that didn't seem to fit other classes. And then above that is the Gloomstalker. Gloomstalkers are at home in the darkest places, deep under the earth, in the gloomy alleyways, in primeval forests, and wherever else the light dims. Most folks enter such places with trepidation, but Gloomstalkers venture boldly into the darkness, seeking to ambush threats before they can reach the broader world. Such rangers are often found in the Underdark, but they will go any place where evil lurks in the shadows. What? So it's just a cave-dwelling ranger. I don't know. That's like, I don't know why that was needed. The Beastmaster archetype is sort of taking over as a third, as a secondary feature. It's like a subclass that you can assume at a certain level. The Beastmaster archetype embodies a friendship between civilized races and the beasts of the wild. United in focus, beasts and ranger fight the monsters that threaten civilization and wilderness alike. To me, that's the closest route to the actual core ranger that there is. And I feel like a cross between the Beastmaster, the Hunter, and the Monster Slayer is what the Ranger should be. I don't know that it needs subclasses. It just seems such an unfortunate addendum to this class that used to be a good class. And you can only get access to these subclasses at 3rd level and higher. You take one at 3rd level. And so you come to a point where you choose between having an animal companion or summoning swarms or slaying monsters or being a hunter archetype or a Gloomstalker or Horizon Walker, and you pick one and then you just don't do any of this stuff for the rest of it. And I feel like that's a lost opportunity. And like the key important feature for a ranger has always sort of been the animal companion. And the hunter in the wilderness, like the monster, it's instead of Monster Slayer and Hunter class, it should be Monster Hunter. Yeah, the hunter archetype feels like just a splitting. The monster slayer was one that dragons, evil fae, fiends, vampires, and whatnot. The hunter is giants and those types of things. I think you're just trying to overly specialize at that point. But here's the thing. In all of this, the ranger, none of these things really, some of them add spell abilities, but none of them really require that you have a spell casting class. But there is a class of spell casting specifically for the ranger. So spell casting. By the time you reach 2nd level, you have learned to use the magical essence of nature to cast spells, much as a druid does. And so at that point, they're just essentially saying, like, just give them access to druid spells. So, but it's saying use this ranger spell list. Sorry about the sibilant S's. I apologize for that. But it's essentially saying spell rules for the general rules of spell casting and the spell list for the ranger spells. Ranger's tables show how many spell slots you may have to cast your ranger spells of 1st level and higher. Okay, where's the spell list here? Spell slots. What? All right, let's go back up, all the way up to the top here. Where's my list of spells that the ranger gets? Okay, spell slots per spell level. You don't get any until 2nd level, and at 2nd level you get 2 1st level spells. It's not until 5th level that you get a 2nd level spell, and it's not until 9th level that you get a 3rd level spell slot. And it looks like you never really go much past, well, okay, you have to be 17th level before you get a 5th level spell slot. And I feel like it's not really needed. Not in the way they're using it. Now, when you look at the list of features that they stole from the ranger and gave to other classes, the scout in rogue class, some of the features of bard, some of the features of barbarian, the animal companion, like, if you just took those things and made them abilities, we could actually benefit this a lot more by jumping over into this. I'm getting ahead of where we are already. There's a tendency to want to make them a fighter / druid, and you can do some of that. But I feel like the direction that makes the most sense to go with this is to borrow from what they do for the monk. The monk class is essentially, monks make careful study of a magical energy that most monastic traditions call ki. The energy is an element of the magic that suffuses the multiverse, specifically the element that flows through the living bodies. Monks harness this power within themselves to create magical effects and exceed their body's physical capabilities. And of some of their special attacks can hinder the flow of ki in their opponents. Now, here's what I think really makes more sense. If we took this sort of model, which is in some regards similar to what I was doing with the sorcerer's spell points, or the metamagical spell points, and a little bit of the bard's tapping into the social network, not quite the druids drawing from nature around them. I feel like I kind of want to make, I almost want to make this the reverse of the druid. So in this sense, what you have is, instead of somebody who taps into the power of the natural environment around them to use that magic to achieve certain effects, I feel like a druid taps into the environment, draws power into themselves to power themselves in an ability to do something. I feel like doing the reverse makes more sense for me for the ranger. The ranger should be somebody who taps into themselves, like the monk taps into the key, their own personal power source, and then feeds that energy to the environment to achieve certain effects. And the reason why I'm likely to take this approach is when you look at the monk class for role-playing games, their ability to do certain things, they get unarmed attack, which is not something I'm worried about right now, but they get key points. Second level you have 2, third level you have 3, fourth level you have 4, so on and so forth. And you expend a key point to achieve a certain effect. And so I'll try to find an example here. Okay, so flurry of blows. Immediately after you take the attack action on your turn, you can spend 1 key point to make 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action. So you have those, basically it's you hit somebody and you can spend a little of your energy to punch and kick them at the same time. So you're doing more than 1 hit at a time. Patient defense. Spend 1 key point to take the dodge action as a bonus action on your turn. So you get to hit them and then you dodge, which means the next time they try to hit you, you get out of the way. And then a few other features like Step of the Wind, disengage and dash action as a bonus action. So you can actually hit and run without imposing a penalty on yourself for doing it. Those are very valuable skills. I feel like having things like that potentially available to the ranger would be useful. But I also feel like them being able to connect with and harness the territory around them, it's less about controlling of their own body or using their own things to make themselves more powerful, and more about controlling the field that you're on. So if you could reach out and make the terrain around you more difficult to walk on, you've slowed down enemies. If you made a jagged, rocky ground for a hoofed animal, they're less likely to keep trying to run on that. It's like putting caltrops down and hurting the hooves of horses. And so that's that kind of thing I can kind of see maybe giving a little bit of magic to the ranger. But I also feel like the versatility and the power in the ranger was more about the skills they brought to the table. A ranger could be a thief, could be a healer, could be a bard, could be a fighter, and maybe a little bit of a magic user too. But magic use was never their biggest thing. So I feel like it's almost makes more sense to, I mean, it feels like swap out the spell abilities for skills. Just give them more skill sets. The ranger was supposed to be the scrappy survivor, the one who could make it in any environment. And I feel like giving them a spell list and giving them spell slots is the wrong way to do that. That character benefited from a very different, so I don't think I don't think that magic is the way to go with this. And I feel like it's weird to talk about a magic system for a character in terms of it not being magic. But I do think, like, perhaps, like, let's see what we can do here with the ranger spells. What do we got here? Ranger spells. So the list of spells the ranger gets. I feel like some of these don't make a lot of sense. Some of them do, and they're all first level spells. So you get one shot at them. None of them are cantrips. Absorb Element. A spell captures some of the incoming energy, lessens its effects on you, and stores it for your next melee attack. You have resistance to the triggering damage type until the start of your next turn. That just basically means that if somebody throws cold at you or acid at you or whatever, you don't take damage. You don't take as much damage. You take less damage from environmental hazards. Or spells that have the effect of environmental hazards, and then you have the ability, you release some of that damage back at your target. I don't know that needs to be a thing. Alarm. Okay, you set an alarm against unwanted intrusion. That's potentially a ranger spell, but it's also a ritual spell that you could do. I feel like ritual spells may be the way to go for a ranger, but animal friendship, that should just be an ability. That shouldn't have to be a spell slot that you use. Beast bond. Again, you establish a telepathic link with one beast you touch that is friendly to you or charmed by you. The spell fails if the beast's intelligence is 4 or higher. Until the spell ends, the link is active while you and the beast are within line of sight of each other. Through the link, the beast can understand your telepathic messages. I don't know why you need to do that. This spell lets you convince a beast that you mean it no harm. Is animal friendship. Choose a beast, yada, yada, yada. Spell. Otherwise, the beast must succeed a wisdom roll and charmed for the spell duration. If you or one of your companions harms the target, the spell ends. I don't like that. Should just be your ability to connect with nature. You should pretty much be able to cantrip that. And so I almost feel like maybe doing a sorcerer mod for this, where you have access to animal friendship and speak with animals and plants, animal and plant friendship, or whatever you want to call it. You should be able to automatically just connect with them as a cantrip. You can use it as many times a day as you want. And if you want to up the level of that spell to a communicate with animals. So friendship with them is your cantrip. Speak with or communicate with them should be level 1, at which point then you're sort of rolling against your magic pool. Or no, not your magic pool. Sorcerer, if I remember correctly, the way I set it up, sorcerer rolled against their magic risk of something going wrong. But I feel like if we tweak that sorcerer mode, so it's not like you risk harming the animal or yourself in doing this, but do something like the bard, where your magic pool, your pool of your battery that you can draw from, is your friendship with your environment, your connection with your environment. Like the bard has its connection with the community, its reputation. And so fostering a better reputation with your environment improves your pool of power and your battery. And it lets you draw more power for a given spell, but those spells are directly meant to be benefiting the animals and the plants in your environment, not making you more powerful. I don't know if I made any sense with that, but I feel like for a ranger, your goal should be your reputation among the wild things and your ability to boost their ability to protect themselves or fight off intruders. And I feel like you could do that fairly well with a animal and plant friendship and a communicate with animals and plants, which would just be an extension of the power range for that. Ensnaring Strike, Fog Cloud, Goodberry, which is actually, Goodberry is actually a good one. And that brings to mind, like, Goodberry is a spell that you create 3 magical, or up to 10 berries appear in your hand and are infused with magic for the duration. A creature can use its action to eat 1 berry. Eating a berry restores 1 hit point, and the berry provides enough nourishment to sustain a creature for 1 day. So you get 10 berries, and the berries lose their potency if they have not been consumed within 24 hours of the casting of this spell. So it's like a 1-day thing where you can basically eat a berry, a magically created berry, that provides you with all the nutrients you need. It's what is it, Elvish Wayfaring bread from Lord of the Rings, so that you can create a berry out of pretty much nowhere that meets all your food needs, so you don't have to worry about running out of food on your adventure. Like, that's a useful thing, but I feel like a more valuable thing to think about is a ranger or a ranger spell of 1st level is Cure Wounds. They have the potential to be a healer, which is a feature that I liked about the class when I played it in role-playing games. You had the healer abilities, the thief abilities, the bard abilities, the fighter abilities, and a little bit of magic use. And I feel like being able to tap into those healing abilities would be nice, but you don't have to use magic to do it. So what makes more sense for a ranger is to be versed in herbalism, be able to make poultices and minor healing concoctions. And so I feel like that's more important to make it a skill that is inherent with the class. Or, like, I feel like what you're going to end up doing is making spell points that grant you skill abilities. And I mean, I guess that's the way to go. I don't know. I do think a touch of that sorcerer that can listen and understand the wilderness they're in and also communicate to it to a certain degree, that's almost like the extent of what the ranger's spells should be. And then everything else should be expressed through skill sets. I mean, here we've got Animal Messenger, which is again just another way of speaking and conveying things with animals. Beast Sense, Bark Skin, Zephyr Strike. What is that? You move like the wind until the spell ends. Your movement doesn't provoke opportunity attacks. Once before the spell ends, you can give yourself advantage on 1 weapon attack. This is essentially the thief's sneak attack. and the disengage attack rolled into one. And they made it a spell. It doesn't need to be that. That could just be a set of skills. Condor arrows, some of that's, making your arrows special attacks. I don't know that you need to do that. Dark vision, find traps, that's a thief skill. Healing spirit, that's a cleric skill. Locate animals or plants. Locate object. Pass without a trace. Yeah, I feel like this should be just sorcerer with 2 spells that you can do at different levels. And instead of hazards of harming self or someone else, your power points, your magic points, are generated as your reputation in the wilderness to which you are currently traveling. Yeah, I feel like if you did that, but you left, I don't know, maybe mix it a little bit with what I did with Wizard, where some high-level spells are done as rituals. Yeah, just give them the ability to do ritual spells, but not the ability to make the spell tokens. Yeah, I think that probably makes sense. It's just sorcerer with some ritual casting capabilities. And sorcerer with their choice of spells different for the beginning, being nature focused. And their magic source being their reputation among the wilderness. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward, I think. I still feel like it's an underutilized class. And I think part of that is just because so many of the skills are dispersed among other classes. And I also feel like part of it is a matter of it's like they tried too hard to turn every class magical, and so now, like I was saying, the pass without a trace is a thief's sneak. Dark vision, find traps, Zephyr Strike. These are thief skills turned into spells. Doesn't need to be that way. And some of the rest of these are druid skills turned into spells. I think giving skill sets at other points and just giving them some minor sorcerer abilities, I think would probably be what I do with this. Which I guess it still feels unsatisfying. It still feels like they've shorthanded that class. Yeah, I guess that's the best I can do for that. I guess if I do another magic one tomorrow, I guess because I'm on a run here, I will do monk, because that's really all that's left. The paladin, I think I've already covered. I covered the fact that the paladin is just a fighter with clerical abilities, and other than that, the arcane trickster is just a rogue with sorcerer or wizard abilities. Maybe I'll look at artificer, but I don't know that I need to. Artificer, I think, works pretty well where it is. mean, they still rely a little bit on a Vancian magic approach, but narratively they've included enough that you can just bend it so that it's non-Vancian. I might cover a little bit of that tomorrow, but I think I'll talk about Monk tomorrow. Probably, if they don't double shift me again. But so what would that look like in a video game? As I started the episode trying to take a look at how they would handle the Ranger in Final Fantasy, but that one, I mean, it's a white magic casting range weapon fighter, which it's a funny, like the term Ranger doesn't come from that. Ranger is meant to be more like a forest ranger, not a ranged weapon user. It just happens to be a functional pun because they more often than not are a Robin Hood type character using bows. Okay, so yeah, Final Fantasy III, I think, was the Ranger job is gained from the Fire Crystal. That's not, nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Let's see what Video Game Ranger brings up. Because I feel like it was, what? No, that's not what I meant by that. I'm not talking about a video of a game ranger. I'm talking about a video game ranger. No, yeah, no, Google, you're not useful anymore. Get better, Google. So here's a good example of something like this. An army ranger is not a forest ranger, and they are not specifically about ranged attacks. That's the term is being used there for it's a very jumbled meaning for that term, and so I think it lost some of its significance in confusion of its function. Yeah, no. It's a class I feel has passed away, and we are just trying to keep it alive. Although, honestly, the Beastmaster, and if you combine the Hunter and Monster Slayer, that's sort of what you'd kind of want the Ranger to be. Yeah, I think you'd have to rebuild the whole class for Ranger. Maybe I should give it a play in 5th edition and see how it functions for that game. But I feel like they just butchered that class. And I'm sad because it used to be the one I played the most often. I think I mentioned that before. But we shall see where we can go from here. I guess I'll catch you tomorrow for Monk. What time are we at? Yeah, we're almost at midnight here. So I'm going to call that, and I will come back tomorrow and maybe be a little more functionally useful for a topic. This felt like a non-magic system more than trying to devise a functional magic system for this. And I think at the end of this, I do want to do a recap of all of them so I can really get a sense of how they all work together. Okay, so I'm going to say take care and have a good night. Yeah, it's disappointing to see a class you used to love and play a lot disappear. I got an ear infection, I think.